Welcome back. You're still tuned into News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. 14 minutes past 8 Central African time. And we're going to be switching gears now, or we're going to be kickstarting the show rather, with what's very, very topical right now, the conversation around anti-illegal immigration sentiment, the violence that sometimes it comes with. And I think most importantly, the response. And the response not only from the South African government, but from governments across the SADC region. And I think that's a conversation that's not had quite enough. How are the countries where South Africa is hosting majority of its migrants from reacting to all of this? I think Malawi has been quite proactive, and I'm not sure what you make of other African countries. But I think what sparks the conversation, particularly this morning, is a very, very concerning development. A Malawian national has been killed in an informal settlement. This is near Pietermaritzburg. This was just a few days after an anti-illegal immigration march in the area. Police are still investigating. Investigations are underway and they're ongoing. And the motive has yet to be officially confirmed. But I think the incident in itself has reignited concerns about growing hostility towards foreign nationals in South Africa. I think we all know at this point that the country has witnessed a rise in anti-immigration rhetoric and mobilization in recent months. Some groups, March and March being the most notable one, obviously blaming undocumented migrants for crime, unemployment, and pressure on public services. So as these tensions continue to brew almost and to play out, I want us to chat a bit to Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda, is the chairperson of the African Diaspora Global Network, and we'll be chatting briefly about the safety of migrant communities. What's the sentiment and conversations that are being had? Also, the role of the political rhetoric and whether enough is being done to prevent violence, to repatriate those that need to be repatriated by the government, especially on the SADC region. So we'll be heading over to that conversation. Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda is joining us via our virtual platform. Doc, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media.
Thank you, Sabelo. Good morning and good morning to the viewers.
There we go. I think I would like to kickstart the conversation with just your reaction to first the reports of that killing of a Malawian national in Pietermaritzburg, and also just generally how the conversation and the sentiment of organizations like March and March and Operation Tutula have almost evolved as the days progressed, and as we head to that quote unquote deadline of June the 30th. What's your sentiment? What's your feeling at this point around everything that we're seeing unfold?
Well, look, it's very sad that as we speak now, we're speaking, we've lost a life, just another life has been lost. And in fact, I think we should not be calling them anti-illegal immigration marches, because they are anti-migration marches. Because if you look at the video clips, of this Malawian national that was being attacked, I mean, nobody could tell. I mean, we can't say that that person was, unlawful in the country, because nobody had the expertise, to determine whether the person had documents or not. And we have seen that, there's been numerous also, statements issued by government officials that nobody is allowed, including the courts. No one is allowed to ask anyone, about documents, whether they've got documents or what documents they have, because it is the job of, the police and the immigration officials. Now, having said that, it is very sad that, we've got people that are willing to lead groups that are murderous. And we see that even in some of the captions, or stories are written, it says that, after people had returned from the march, when the march had been done, then a group broke away and went and attacked people. But if you look at the clips that we see a group of people still standing together, within, close to, the urban area there, and people, obviously going to, attacking a person, and, people, are exclaiming. So that shows you that it is the very same march, not even a breakaway group, that attacked the person. And we have said this, even written to the police commissioner, national police commissioner, and copied this to parliament, that, we know that, the law, says that if somebody, for example, who is drunk gets involved in an accident and kills a person, that person is charged with murder, because when the person drank and decided to drive, they foresaw and knew that there was a likelihood that their actions could kill a person. And that is, the law that deals with what we call dolus eventualis, where somebody reconciles themselves with the consequences of their action, and when they foresee that it could lead to an unlawful act. The leaders of March and March are aware that inciting people and taking these groups of people without adequate marshals to even disperse the people has a likelihood of leading to people being attacked and killed. And surely they should be charged, because it means that they acted in common purpose with the people that did, attack this. If you remember in 2016, when there were, similar attacks in Durban, it was after the late king had said sentiments that were really, not favorable, against foreign nationals. And people acted, not directly because the king said, go and attack people. And we also read in the Bible the story of David when he longed for water. And, his soldiers went and even endangered their lives to bring him the water, because that longing was an indirect instruction, as is known. So that is what concerns us, that if the government is not taking steps when these actions are happening, where people are being killed, and we are not seeing people being charged, and this is not the first time. This has always been the case. We have not seen people, except in very, few incidences, being charged, with the murder of foreign nationals when they are killed. And this tells us that, somehow the government is not as serious about stopping it, but somehow it is willing it to happen. Because if it wasn't willing it to happen, if it was concerned about the relations of South Africa, with other, countries, in the region, then it would not be allowing people to be killed and then simply say, well, it was in a march. The first thing that we should see happening is to see the leaders of these marches, for example, being charged, because we cannot continue to say this is business as normal when people continue to be killed, and those people that lead those marches and incite people to those marches and say that they're defending South Africa and these are the sentiments of South Africa are walking scot-free when their actions are leading to the death of people.
I want to come to the response of various governments here, because I think there's a conversation that we are missing. We are putting, I think, at least from my perspective, a lot of onus on the South African government. It's the South African government that must act. It's the South African government, that should protect migrants, which is granted. We are the host country, but are we not also not giving some bit of responsibility to governments, especially on the SADC region, for some of the countries that the majority of the migrants that South Africa is hosting come from? The likes of the Zimbabwean government, the Malawian government I mentioned, is looking a bit proactive in how they're repatriating those that want to be repatriated. From your perspective, shouldn't another angle of the conversation be around the governments of some of these countries and how they're responding to this? Because I think we can all see the South African government is overwhelmed. They don't know what conversations to have or what actions to take. I think just yesterday, Firoz Kachalia mentioned that there's almost 600 million, if I'm not mistaken, that the SAPS will direct in order to mitigate what might be uncertainty and uprisings that we might see on June the 30th. And there was a lot of criticism. They say, well, instead of redirecting that 600 million to protecting the borders and making sure that they're not as porous as they are, you are directing it to stop South Africans who some think they're making quite valid remarks around the amount of illegal foreigners in the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think for quite a long time we have said that the reasons why we have got this migration and the downward trend has got something to do with obviously the poor management and the fact that African countries are poorly are politically structured, and they've got very bad politics where people are the victims. But I think at this particular stage, the concern, especially after the death of another person, really has to focus on South Africa, because South Africa has allowed this creature to grow, where people, for example, want to scapegoat migrants and attack them. It has been happening. People have been laughing about it, and in fact, the reactions of other governments at this particular stage, where they are taking people or repatriating people, like what we saw Ghana and Nigeria doing, is something that we should not be celebrating at all, because that precedent is unacceptable. Because what it is actually going to bring about is a situation where South Africans or other nationals are also going to be attacked in those particular countries in retaliation to what we have seen happening. So it is something that we should not be encouraging at all, because once we've got something of that nature taking place and governments intervening to remove their people in South Africa, I can rest assure you that what is being sown, the seed that is being sown here, is a seed, for example, of hatred, amongst Africans, so that Africans are going to end up, killing each other in the continent. We're going to see a lot of industrial espionage. There are shops that South Africa has, businesses that it has across, the divide of the SADC, region. And, many, South African families live in these particular areas. It will become very, very unfortunate that we see people, having to retaliate. You can imagine people that have been removed from South Africa, that have lost relatives, how they will be reacting to this. So I think, in my view, it becomes something that we cannot really at this stage be talking about. We need to talk about exactly the fact that the government is failing to act appropriately, because if this is nipped in the bud, we do not see this happening, and government then continues to do what it has to do, to deal with irregular, migration, to make sure that, there are deportations when people are coming in, and the borders are therefore protected in like manner, and it engages the various governments that are undemocratic. That would be the way to go, not this reaction to, these particular actions that are dangerously barbaric and very inhuman and unacceptable. Because we cannot accept a situation where, people are attacked, people are chased around, even wild dogs, animals have got rights. They're not treated the manner in which, these people that are being attacked, in the name and the branding, of illegal immigration, it's basically happening. It cannot be accepted. The right to life is sacrosanct. And we cannot have anybody, abrogating the right to themselves to kill people, and then, think that, it can be accepted, and that, we should then maybe, exonerate, the government for doing that. So I really think that at this particular stage, we have a serious problem, and that serious problem has been as a result of the government's failure to act timeously and allowing people to grow more courage in acting in a manner that is unlawful.
I'm going to ask you a question that I think, because I asked different people this question, and the responses are fascinating because they're always different. From your perspective, where should this conversation end? You have South Africans, and I think it's a large part. It's a considerable amount of South Africans that hold this anti-immigrant sentiment. The conversation won't disappear, and I think it has proven. Whether you go back to 2008 to 2016, every couple of years it always seems to prop up. We can't deny that South Africa has a considerable migrant population, whether legal or illegal. I think that's a conversation that still needs to be honed into. But what's the end of this conversation? Where must it? Which point must it come to where both parties feel like they are being heard? They feel like their concerns are taken into consideration? Because I think what is frustrating, at least from what I'm gathering from a lot of South Africans who hold these sentiments, is they feel like they're just being dismissed. They're told to keep quiet, sit in a corner. Whatever you're saying doesn't matter. The government tells you to keep quiet. These organizations, human rights organizations, and them are also telling you to keep quiet, and you're condemned the continent over. And illegal or legal migrants also feel like, hey, we are here in South Africa because of very valid reasons. Our safety and our human rights must also be protected by the norms and standards that are set internationally. Where do we meet each other? Where does this conversation ultimately come to a solution from your perspective?
Look, Sabelo, unfortunately, it's no longer a conversation now. It is murderous, barbaric acts. That's what it is, and it cannot be a conversation when people are being murdered. And this is not.
I don't think that's fair to say, dog. There's no point where we can say there's no room for conversation anymore.
No. Look, I'm saying.
That's a very dangerous precedent to say,
No,
well, we
no,
don't talk. What happens in the place of having a conversation?
no. I'm saying we're not talking. I'm saying what we are referring to, what is happening now. It is
All
not
right.
a conversation when people are being murdered, because look, all actions are referred to, as a means of speech, because you can speak, using sign language and all that. So this kind of communication, it is no longer, an ordinary conversation, but murderous acts. That's what I'm basically saying. Now, what I can tell you is that if you look at what we have seen happening, and if there are people that, if South Africa wants to be a closed economy that does not have migrants, they might as well make that, very clear. The conversation that we're talking about, nobody is saying people should not talk about, irregular migration for starters. Even migration itself, if the populace of South Africa feels that they do not want migrants in the country, they can always say that. They can vote for a government that says we don't want migrants. Let's get migrants out of South Africa. South Africa must be a locked country that does not deal with any other country. It is a sovereign right of the people of South Africa to determine how they want to be government and how they want things to run in this country. So if this is what they want and they vote for a government that says, we don't want to interact with other countries, let's close our borders, and just be South Africans, they have every right to do that. But if it is going to be initiated by killing other people, unfortunately, it sets a very wrong precedent that has got a trigger effect that is going to be, something that we're going to live with for so many years and may really like. That's where showing my concern, because nobody, even, saying South Africans must not talk about what they want. Talk is different. Go on the streets, demonstrate is different. It is acceptable. It is protected in the Constitution. But there is no rule of law when people begin to take the law into their own hands. And we have seen this being fanned also by politicians that scapegoat, on migrants, including government itself. Even the statements that we've had, the president saying, they have not been completely, not without some scapegoating, where they have said that, for example, you hear even a president saying, people must respect our laws. I mean, when you say people must not respect, it's as if migrants are coming here to what have they done to disrespect the laws? So this is our country. They must go back to their country. So, and then they say that there is entitlement because, migrants must not be speaking against things that are wrong, even if when they are done. When in actual fact, everyone has got the benefit of the protection, of the law, that's applied. They tell you cannot speak in South Africa. Go and speak in your own country and all that kind of thing. I mean, what kind of society are we living in now?
No, very, very important. Doc, I think we're going to leave it on that note. A wonderful conversation to have. Really appreciate your time, and I hope we chat again soon.
Thank you very much, and good morning.
There you go. Chairperson of the African Diaspora Global Network, Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda. Another element of this conversation, this rising anti-illegal sentiment with, I think, big elements of vigilantism and criminality. I think that we can't, escape. But yeah, I think they're very, very important conversations to be had. There's still space for dialogue. And I hope we do reach that point, because it's getting very, very dangerous. People are losing their lives. And I think our government is not being as proactive as you would have loved them to be. But that's the case, eh? With our African National Congress, well, the GNU now. Hey, what's the Minister of Home Affairs saying? Has anyone saw statement, anything? Nothing. Wait. It's going to get very dangerous. I don't think people really understand the point that South Africa is in right now and how quickly things can get out of hand if this is not dealt with appropriately. And I don't think any of us want that point, want us to reach that point. It's time for the government to act, man, appropriately. Going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.